Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I'm delighted to visit with you here today at this great institution. I have addressed congregations. This is one of the largest, and I'm greatly honored to be here, Vice Chancellor. Let me begin by extending my sincere gratitude to the Vice Chancellor and the university leadership for the kind invitation to deliver this public lecture and to engage with the university community. In my entire career, and even in my retirement, I have always derived great joy in engaging with young people and learning from them. The students and young people present here today, you are the future of our country. And whenever an opportunity like this arises, I take it as an important occasion for exchanging ideas on critical issues that shape our nation and our collective future. Historically, universities and academic institutions have been the laboratories where ideas, knowledge, and skills that shape society's destiny and the growth are debated, tested, and validated. This is a role that our universities need to reclaim and affirm as our societies go through transition and advancement in an ever-changing and complex global, regional, and national context. I'm pleased with your choice of the topic for today's discussion: good governance, constitutionalism, and the rule of law, as the topic for the public lecture today. It is not only timely and critical for every Kenyan, but also as we observe the regional and global dynamics. Good governance, constitutionalism, and the rule of law, as the topic for today's public lecture, may sound like legal or political concepts, but in practice, in the real world, they are pillars upon which the very foundation of our society rests. Without them, democracy weakens, institutions collapse, and just becomes elusive. I will shortly explain their importance, the challenges we face as society and the country, and the role each of us, especially you young people, in the young generation, must play in safeguarding them. What do we mean by good governance? The United Nations Development Program, UNDP, defines the term good governance as, and I quote, the exercise of economic, political, and administrative authority to manage a country's affairs at all levels. It comprises mechanisms, processes, and institutions through which citizens and groups articulate their interests, exercise their legal rights, meet their obligations, and mediate their differences, end of quote. Good governance is therefore the heartbeat of any prosperous nation. It determines how resources are managed, how decisions are made, and how public officials are held accountable. Good governance is what differentiates stable nations from those struggling with corruption, mismanagement, and political instability. But what exactly does the concept of good governance entail? The concept of good governance is built on several fundamental principles These include the commonly cited and stated principles such as accountability, transparency, inclusive governance, based on participation and consultation, and respect for the rule of law, among other principles that enhance people-centered, democratic, responsive, and accountable governance. Accountability means that leaders and the institutions of governance must be answerable to the people. It also means that elected and appointed public officers should not only serve the interests of the people, but also take responsibility for their actions. Transparency, on the other hand, means that governance processes must be open to scrutiny by members of the public, and that people should have access to information regarding how their country is governed. It is clear that where there is accountability and transparency, where there is no accountability and transparency, the resulting environment creates conditions favorable for corruption, abuse of office, and other known ills to thrive. Good governance also entails inclusiveness and public participation. For good governance to be achieved, there necessarily must be popular participation of the people in decision-making processes acceptable by the government of criticism, as well as addressing the criticism positively, formidable checks and balances, respect for the rule of law, as well as existing separation of functions and powers by different organs of government, and consequently the ability of the same government to effectively plan and adequately deliver quality services, prompting improvements in socio-political, economic, environment, and cultural fields. Indeed, a truly democratic society ensures that all voices are heard. Every citizen, regardless of gender, ethnicity, religion, or economic status, should have a say in the governance of their country. Where citizens' collective voices are not heard, the governance processes will be alienated from the people they are supposed to serve. Again, this is an environment that breeds impunity, lack of accountability, and other ills associated with a system of governance that is a law unto itself. Finally, good governance entails respect for the rule of law. The United Nations defines the rule of law as, and I quote, a principle of governance in which all persons, institutions, and entities, public and private, including the state itself, are accountable to laws that are publicly promulgated, equally enforced, and independently adjudicated, and which are consistent with international human rights and norms and standards. It requires as well measures to ensure adherence to the principles of supremacy of the law, equality before the law, accountability to the law, fairness in the application of the law, separation of powers, participation in decision-making, legal certainty, avoidance of arbitrariness, and the procedural and the legal transparency, end of quote. Are you able to hear me? Raise your hand if you can all hear me. Thank you very much. The concept of rule of law plainly means that a country's laws must be applied fairly and consistently to all individuals regardless of their status in society. The rule of law refers to a culture in governance where decisions, actions, omissions, and all other governance processes are informed by or adhere to applicable law and the rules that govern society. The dictates of the rule of law call on both the governed and the leaders to remain committed to obeying the law and ensuring that institutions deliver on their respective mandates and in accordance with the law. The rule of law is also predicated on the absolute independence of the judiciary and its freedom from temptations to corruption. It indicates that the judiciary must be free from all mechanizations, coercion, or force from other arms of government and also from the public. It entails that citizens are accorded the right to a fair hearing and that the judges and the tribunal are impartial. At a bare minimum, good governance with accountability and transparency is the foundation of peace and stability, without which all societies' greater aims cannot be achieved. The good governance principles that I have just described form a core part of Kenya's constitutional governance. The founding provisions of our constitution, as well as the beginning of every chapter of the Constitution, lists values, all of which seek to highlight and promote good governance. It is, however, critical to note that these values were not just plucked from outer space and enshrined in our Constitution. The lived realities and the struggles of Kenyans led to strong demands for changes in governance, structures, and processes in the country. Kenya has faced several historical challenges related to governance. These challenges often stem from the following colonial legacies: socio-political dynamics and economic factors. First, the colonial legacy sowed seeds of exclusion based on race and later exclusion based on region and ethnicity. Specifically, the colonial development policy was based on racial exclusion, which led to disparities in development, where regions that were favored for European settlement developed, while those set aside for natives lagged behind in all aspects of development and advancement. The centralized system of governance that was bequeathed to post-independent Kenya led to further exclusion of some ethnic groups and thus exacerbated the colonial legacy of exclusion of groups that were not in control of the national resources. This legacy and its perpetuation in the decades after independence led to tensions, sometimes conflicts, particularly around election periods. You may easily recall the politically instigated clashes over the years, the most pronounced being the 1992, 1997, and 2007, 2008, when Kenya faced unprecedented election violence. Secondly, corruption and mismanagement of resources has been a key and a significant challenge to the country, hindering development and eroding public trust in government institutions. Corruption has negatively affected and impacted the delivery of public services and economic growth. There are numerous unresolved scandals over the years that have become a stain on Kenya's history as well as current governance. Scandals like Triton, Goldenberg, Anglo-leasing, and the Kemsha and the COVID-19 billionaires easily come to mind, not to mention the numerous reported scandals involving county governments, some of which have led to the ouster and the impeachment of some governors from some counties. In summary, corruption remains a major existential threat to this country's future, and if nothing drastic and radical is done, the collective future of this country and its people is doomed. It is as simple as that. Unless something drastic and radical is done, the collective future of Kenya and its people is doomed. Thirdly, land and resource disputes, mainly based on ownership and use, have been contentious issues with historical grievances stemming from colonial exploitations and improper allocations of post-independence, contributing to disputes and violence. The issue of land remains a highly emotive national issue, which has been an underlying factor of political and ethnic conflict in the country. The failure to address key issues in land has led to mismanagement and corruption in the land sector and continues to be a threat to this country's stability and development. Fourthly, the contested elections and succession politics continue to imperil the country's stability and future. Highly contested elections and the deadly ethnic zero-sum game that is displayed at every general election contributes to the fragility of the country's governance and political structures. This political culture keeps Kenyans on the edge. This political culture keeps Kenyans on the edge and in the tenterhooks of the perpetual political transition mood that ends up distracting from development and other governance processes. In summary, for those in political office, every action and strategy are motivated by the desperation to maintain power and to be re-elected at all costs. On the other hand, the actions of those in opposition are motivated by the desperate need to win an election. This ends up being a paralyzing distraction to the business of governance in this country. Lastly, is the history of a police force established to serve the interests of the colonizers. The violence against the citizens, abductions, assassinations, and impunity propagated by the colonizers are a legacy that the country continues to bear to date. The cumulative effect of the above factors is weak and ineffective public institutions and governance processes that do not serve the needs of the Kenyans. Instead, public institutions become political tools and instruments that perpetuate the very ills and vices they were established to address. In this regard, as an appropriate example is the current human rights violations through abductions and explained killings of Kenyans by suspected security operatives, the very institutions that are meant to protect them. The Kenyan struggles and challenges that I have enumerated informed the push for a new constitution to address past ills and give Kenyans a reset. After more than 2 decades of a consistent demand for a new constitution, In August 2010, Kenyans overwhelmingly voted for the current constitution. The promulgation of and adoption of the current constitution was a landmark achievement. It introduced significant reforms, including devolution of power, the establishment of independent commissions, and a stronger Bill of Rights. The founding provisions of our Constitution, as well as specific articles such as Article 10 on national values and the principles of governance, speak directly to accountability, transparency, rule of law, and constitutionalism, among others. The fact that these norms and values are part of the substantive provisions of the Constitution means that they are not just aspirational, but are a part of the binding norms that require adherence and implementation. The Constitution binds every state officer, public officer, and places a duty on every person to ensure its implementation. The doctrine of constitutionalism entails the idea of limited government. Constitutionalism is defined as the exercise of powers within the confines of the Constitution. In other words, the actual behavior of political or public actors must correspond with the limits set down by the Constitution. Thus, all public officials, whether elected or non-elected, must follow the dictates of the Constitution. There is no constitutionalism if the rules laid down by the Constitution can be freely amended by public officers wherever they view them as obstacles to their agenda. And we have seen very many of those. Constitutionalism means that all actions of government and public officers must be guided by the Constitution. It means that the law is applied equally to all citizens regardless of their political affiliations or oppositions of power. It means that the Constitution, being the supreme law of the land, is not just a document, but a living instrument that defines how power is exercised, how institutions function, and how the rights are protected. The courts are vested with the power to interpret and apply the Constitution and give orders that will ensure compliance. We have seen many times where courts have intervened in matters of governance to ensure adherence to the Constitution. Numerous cases taken to court by citizens have resulted in court orders against government and other sanctions for non-compliance with the Constitution. Major examples here include striking down of laws and policies for non-compliance with the Constitution, quashing decisions arrived at without due process, and orders for compensation where rights have been abused. Yet, despite the salient provisions of the Constitution and the mechanisms for ensuring and assuring implementation, we have seen numerous instances where constitutional principles are disregarded. We have witnessed attempts to manipulate constitutional provisions for personal or political gain. The question we must then ask is whether we are living the values and principles that we set for ourselves back in August 2010. Are we holding leaders accountable when they act in ways that undermine constitutional principles? Are we actively participating in democratic processes to ensure that the Constitution serves the interests of all Kenyans? We must always remember that constitutionalism is not just the responsibility of the government or the judiciary. It is the collective responsibility that belongs to every citizen. As a former Chief Justice, I have witnessed firsthand struggles of maintaining judicial independence. The judiciary plays a critical role in upholding the rule of law, but it cannot do that alone. It requires the support of other branches of government, civil society, and citizens, which support is often not forthcoming. What role are the young people playing in the governance of our country? I commend you young people, especially those comprising the Gen Z governance, accountability, the Gen Z movement for your demands for good governance, accountability, and the rule of law. By understanding and advocating for adherence to the rule of law, you ensure a just and fair society. Your role in governance constitutionalism and the rule of law should not be passive. It should be active. As such, it is your duty to engage in civic education to understand your rights and your responsibilities. It is your duty to speak out against corruption, injustice, and improper leadership. It is your duty to participate in democratic processes, including voting and policy discussions. And it is your duty to demand accountability from those in power. Do not let apathy or frustration discourage you. Every great movement in the history of this country has been driven by young people who believed in change. You have the Constitution at your fingertips. Technology has made it easier for you to access and engage with the laws that govern your life in interesting ways. So make use of the tools this generation has placed in your hands, not only for entertainment and for education, but also for political change. The future of Kenya depends on individuals like you who have the knowledge and are willing to stand up for what is right. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to reiterate that the principles of good governance, constitutionalism, and the rule of law are not abstract theories. They are the pillars upon which Kenya's democracy, just development, and the future of Africa rests. Commitment to good governance also means prioritizing the needs and well-being of others, because we live in a state of shared humanity. It is therefore our collective duty, whether as leaders, students, professionals, or ordinary citizens, to safeguard these principles. If we fail to uphold them, we risk reversing the progress our country has so far made. I challenge each one of you to be champions of justice and accountability. Even when you are afraid, it will not pay off. Be in the front line as uncompromising soldiers of integrity, even when taking a bribe feels like the only option left for you. Stand fearless against a stubborn system that lures young minds into service for political cartels. Make the choices that shift the nation to new levels of prosperity. Let us build a nation where governance is transparent, where laws are applied fairly, where constitutional principles are respected by all, and where every human life is greatly valued. I thank you once again, Mr. Vice Chancellor, for the opportunity to come and share my thoughts, and look forward to an engaging discussion during the plenary after this. May we always strive for a just, democratic, and prosperous Kenya. Thank you very much for listening to me.